A burning Bentley, Buckhead intersection, 2:47 a.m. One officer reaches through shattered glass. The trapped man looks up and whispers, "You." The officer doesn't hesitate. Freeze that image right there. Hold it. A black officer uniform torn at the sleeve, smoke rising around his shoulders, pulling a man from a wreck that could take them both. And the man being pulled out, the one whose life is being saved in that exact moment, that man spent the last 3 weeks trying to make that officer feel like nothing. These are the black stories nobody puts on the evening news. The real-life stories of men who absorb what the world throws at them and still show up the next morning and still do the job and still reach through the fire. This is one of those stories. And it starts the way most of them do, quietly, before sunrise. In a house nobody would ever call impressive, but that every person inside it kept immaculate. It was 5:45 in the morning when Isaiah Brooks pressed his uniform. He did it the same way every day. Slow past his collar first, then down each sleeve, then the front placket, then the back. His mother used to say that how a man prepares himself tells you everything about how he sees the world. Isaiah had never forgotten that. The iron hissed against the dark fabric, and he worked in silence, the kitchen light, the only thing burning in the house. On the wall behind him hung 3 framed commendations from the Atlanta Police Department. Beside them, a single photograph from his Army Days dress uniform, straight back eyes forward. He never pointed those things out to visitors. If someone noticed, fine. If they didn't, that was fine too. Denise came in from the hallway holding a coffee mug with both hands still in her scrubs, from a night shift she had just finished at Grady Memorial. She set the mug on the counter beside him, without a word, the way people do when they have lived together long enough to move around each other like water. Isaiah glanced over at her. She looked tired but not depleted. There was a difference, and he always knew which one it was. She said, "You're gonna have a long one. I can feel it." He didn't ask what she meant. He just picked up the mug and drank. Down the hall, Caleb was already at his desk. 16 years old and building a future one problem set at a time, geometry notes spread across a surface that was supposed to be for eating breakfast. Isaiah paused in the doorway for a moment and watched his son, the focused angle of his shoulders, the pencil moving without hesitation. The boy had no idea he was being watched. That was the point. Isaiah wanted to see who Caleb was when nobody was looking. He liked what he saw. By 7:10, he was in the cruiser heading north, on the 85, the city coming alive, around him the way it always did. Slow at first, and then all at once. Miguel Ramirez was in the passenger seat drinking gas station coffee and complaining about it at the same time, which was something Miguel did every single morning, and which Isaiah had long ago decided was simply part of the ambient noise of the day, like traffic and dispatch static. They turned onto Peachtree Road at 7:15, and the neighborhood changed the way it always did, gradually, and then completely. The sidewalks got wider, the buildings got taller, the cars got quieter, which was the strange thing about money. The more of it you had, the less sound you seemed to make. A black Porsche Taycan whispered past them, like it was embarrassed to exist. A man in a charcoal suit that cost more than a month of Isaiah's salary stood outside a coffee shop, checking his phone without blinking. Miguel gestured at the storefront sliding past the window. He said, "We protect people who think we're furniture." Isaiah said nothing. He was already watching. He did that everywhere, not out of suspicion, but out of habit, out of training, out of a belief that the world gave you information constantly. And it was a kind of disrespect not to pay attention. He had patrolled this block for 4 years. He knew which restaurants propped their back doors open on warm mornings. He knew which parking structures had broken gate arms that management kept meaning to fix. He knew the rhythms of this street the way a musician knows a song he has played 1,000 times, not by thinking about it, just by being present inside it. He had been present when the black Bentley Flying Spur pulled up to the curb in front of Café Monet and stopped in the fire lane like the red-painted concrete was a suggestion rather than a law. Isaiah pulled the cruiser to the side and stepped out. The Bentley was a newer model, immaculate, the kind of black that looked like it had been polished within the last 20 minutes. The man who stepped out of the driver's side was already talking on a phone, one hand raised in that universal gesture that meant hold on or stop, or both directed at Isaiah before he had taken 2 steps toward the vehicle. The man was somewhere in his late 50s, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that matched the car in its quiet insistence on being noticed. He held the phone to his ear, and looked at Isaiah the way a person looks at a slow-loading web page present, but not engaged, waiting for it to become relevant. Isaiah stopped. He waited. That was something his army training had given him, the ability to occupy a moment without needing to fill it. The man finished his call. He slid the phone into his jacket pocket and looked Isaiah up and down with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite a dismissal, but landed somewhere between the two. He said, "What's the fine? I'll have my assistant handle it." Then he reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and produced a folded set of bills and held them out, the way someone holds out a tip at a hotel, not hostile, not rude, just automatic. The motion of a man who had learned that money resolved inconveniences and had never once been told otherwise. Isaiah looked at the money, then he looked at the man. He said, "Sir, that's not how citations work. There's a process. Your vehicle is blocking a designated fire lane, which is a $250 fine issued through the municipal court system. I can explain the payment process if you'd like." The man lowered the bills slowly. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch. A small smile appeared, not warm, something more like the expression a person makes when a situation confirms something they already believed. He said, "Everything works that way, officer. You'd be surprised." He got back in the Bentley. The door closed with the soft, expensive sound of engineered precision. The car pulled into traffic and was gone before the citation had even been written. Miguel appeared at Isaiah's shoulder. He said, "Did he just try to bribe you?" Isaiah watched the Bentley until it disappeared around the curve on Peachtree. He said he doesn't think it was a bribe. That's the problem. He walked back to the cruiser, picked up his pen, and finished writing the citation for a vehicle that was no longer there. The citation went into the system at 7:34 that morning. By 7:35, Isaiah was already moving to the next call. That was the job. You documented what happened, you moved forward, and you did not carry the last hour into the next one. But the next hour had a way of finding him anyway. The following morning, a Tuesday, Isaiah and Miguel responded to a noise complaint 2 blocks south of Cafe Monet, a restaurant receiving dock, early delivery trucks, someone's alarm going off without reason. Standard. Isaiah was halfway through taking down the property manager's information when the black Bentley rolled past on the street behind him. It slowed. Victor Langford leaned out slightly, not fully just enough to be seen, and spoke to the man standing next to Isaiah. The property manager, a heavy-set guy in a polo shirt named Dale. Victor said, "Dale, is everything all right here?" Then he looked at Isaiah, the way a person looks at something they are still deciding the value of, and he said, "Is there a senior officer available?" Or, he let the sentence end there unfinished, which was worse than finishing it. Dale looked uncomfortable. Isaiah kept writing. He said, "We'll have this resolved in a few minutes, sir." Victor held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was necessary, then drove on. Miguel said nothing until the Bentley was out of sight. Then he said, "Senior officer." Isaiah said, "Write it down." Miguel looked at him. Isaiah said it again, quieter. "Write it down." The next morning was Wednesday. Victor was outside the Buckhead Capital Group offices on Piedmont, with 2 men in suits, both of them carrying the particular confidence of people who had never once doubted they belonged in any room they entered. Isaiah was walking the block when Victor spotted him from 20 feet away and pivoted toward the 2 men with a smile like he had just remembered a good story. He said, "And this right here, this is our neighborhood hall monitor. Keeps the parking in line." One of the men laughed. The other smiled at Isaiah with the specific blankness of someone who found the comment mildly amusing, but not enough to actually participate in it. Isaiah nodded, once said good morning to the group, and kept walking. Behind him, he heard Victor say something he couldn't fully make out, and the first man laughed again, louder this time. Miguel caught up at the corner. He said, "Did you hear that?" Isaiah said, "I heard it." Miguel said, "And?" Isaiah said, "And it's a beautiful morning. Let's keep moving." Thursday was the one that started drawing eyes. Victor was outside a dry cleaner on East Paces Ferry when Isaiah passed on foot patrol. There were 6 or 7 people nearby, a couple waiting for a ride share, a woman walking a dog, a young man eating from a paper bag outside a deli. Victor raised his voice just enough, not shouting, just projecting the way people do when they want an audience but also want deniability. He said, "You know what? I always wonder about these departments, whether they fill the roster based on what the city needs, or based on what looks good on a form. Isaiah did not stop walking. He kept his pace, even his eyes forward. His hands relaxed at his sides. On the other side of the street, a girl who could not have been more than 17 had her phone out. She was looking at it the way teenagers do when they are filming something, without appearing to film something. Isaiah noticed her without looking at her. He had learned that particular skill a long time ago, absorbing the room without reacting to it. He said good morning to the woman with the dog and kept walking. Friday was the $50 bill. Victor's assistant, a young woman who always looked slightly frantic, appeared beside Isaiah outside a CVS at 9 in the morning and pressed a folded bill into his hand before he could say anything. She said, "Mr. Langford wanted to, he said, this is for coffee or whatever you need. He appreciates everything you do for the neighborhood." Isaiah looked at the bill. He looked up at the other side of the street. Victor was standing outside a parking structure, arms crossed, watching. He was smiling the way someone smiles when they think they have made a point. Isaiah held the bill back out to the assistant. He said, "Tell Mr. Langford, that's not necessary." The assistant looked relieved and mortified at the same time. She took the money and walked quickly back the way she came. That evening, when Isaiah filed his third incident report in 5 days, Miguel leaned over from his desk and said, "You know what, you're building right." Isaiah kept typing. He set a record. Miguel said, "Yeah." Isaiah said, "That's what I'm supposed to do." The Buckhead Athletic Club call came in on a Thursday at 12:18 in the afternoon. A disturbance between a valet and a guest over a disputed key scratch on a leased Range Rover. The kind of thing that in most neighborhoods would have been resolved with two adults talking to each other, but in Buckhead had a way of becoming something that required a uniform present before anyone felt safe enough to be reasonable. Isaiah walked in through the side entrance, identified the two parties, spoke to each one separately. For 90 seconds each confirmed the valet had a dash cam that would resolve the scratch dispute, and had both men shaking hands in under 4 minutes. It was textbook. Clean and quiet, and exactly what the job looked like when it was done well. He was turning toward the exit when he heard the chair scrape. Victor Langford was at a round table near the window, 4 men around him in various configurations of expensive casualness, the kind of charity luncheon where the lunch costs more than the charity receives. He had stood up, not all the way, just enough. He was looking at Isaiah with an expression that had already decided what it was going to say before the words arrived. He said, "Does the department know they sent someone to handle this?" He paused. "I was expecting someone more," and then he tilted his head slightly senior. Somewhere to Isaiah's left, a phone screen turned toward him. Victor said no offense. "I'm sure you're very good at directing traffic." 2 men at the table laughed. One of them was already reaching for his wine glass, the kind of laugh that wants to stay comfortable. A third man smiled at the tablecloth. The fourth person at the table did not laugh. She was a young woman in a dark blazer, dark hair, a legal pad in front of her, with notes on it she was no longer looking at. She was looking at Isaiah. Her expression was flat and still, and carried something that was not quite embarrassment and not quite apology, but lived between the two. Isaiah thanked the staff at the front desk by name. He asked them to document the resolution for their records. He said, "You all have a good afternoon," and he walked out. Miguel was on the sidewalk. He looked at Isaiah's face, and his jaw tightened. He said, "Isaiah, say something? Anything?" Isaiah said, "I said everything I needed to say." Miguel said, "You said nothing." Isaiah said, "Exactly." They walked back to the cruiser without another word. By the time Isaiah got home that evening, the video had 847 views. By midnight, it had crossed 6,000. By the following morning, when he was ironing his uniform in the same kitchen with the same light on, and Denise was handing him the same coffee, it had cleared 14,000, and someone in an Atlanta community group had identified the silver-haired man by his Patek Philippe watch and the Bentley flying spur parked outside the club. The caption read, "Is this what Buckhead thinks of the officers who protect them?" Captain Rebecca Morgan called Isaiah at 8:47 that morning and told him to come in before his shift started. She was at her desk when he arrived. The video pulled up on her monitor, a printed copy of something beside her keyboard. She did not look angry. She looked like someone who was trying to determine the full size of a thing before deciding how to respond to it. She said, "You've been documenting this." Isaiah reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set 3 folded sheets of paper on her desk. Incident reports. dated, time-stamped. 3 weeks of notation written in the precise, unsentimental language of someone who had been keeping records not to build a case, but because keeping records was simply what professionals did. Morgan picked up the first sheet. She read it without speaking, then the second, then the third. She looked up at him with an expression that had shifted into something quieter and more deliberate than when he had walked in. She said, "You've been documenting this since the first day." Isaiah said, "I document everything, Captain." Morgan set the papers down carefully and leaned back in her chair. She looked at the wall for a moment in the way people do when they are recalculating something. Whatever she had expected to find when she called him in, it was not this. She set the papers aside and told him to go start his shift. She said she would be in touch. The way she said it was not dismissive. It was the voice of someone who needed time to think before they spoke again, and Isaiah had enough experience reading rooms to know the difference. He put his hat on and walked out into the morning. The shift passed the way shifts do when your mind is running a parallel track underneath everything else. He wrote 2 citations, helped a woman whose car had stalled on Piedmont get it to a safe pull-off, and talked a man down from an argument outside a bank that had started over a parking space and was threatening to become something worse. All of it professional, all of it clean. The parallel track kept running the whole time. That evening, he came home to find Caleb at the kitchen table. The boy had papers spread in front of him, a laptop open beside them, a pencil tucked behind his ear, the way Denise always kept hers when she was in the middle of something at work. He looked up when Isaiah came in and said, "Hey, Dad, can you read this when you get a second?" Isaiah changed out of his uniform, came back to the kitchen in a plain gray shirt and jeans, poured a glass of water, and sat down across from his son. Caleb slid the pages over. Isaiah picked them up. It was a college application essay, Georgia Tech. The prompt at the top asked the applicant to describe a person who had shaped their understanding of integrity. Isaiah read the first paragraph, then the second. His eyes moved steadily down the page, and at some point somewhere in the middle of the third paragraph, his jaw tightened, just once, just for a moment. Then it released, and he kept reading. Caleb was watching him from across the table, pretending not to. When Isaiah finished, he set the pages down flat and looked at his son. Caleb said, "Is it good, Dad?" Isaiah said, "It's exactly right." Caleb let out a breath he had been holding for about 40 seconds and reached for his pencil. He said, "I wasn't sure about the ending." Isaiah said, "Leave the ending the way it is." Caleb nodded and pulled the pages back and started making small notes in the margin. Denise was in the hallway. She had been there for most of it, leaning against the wall just outside the kitchen doorway, with her arms crossed loosely still, in her work clothes watching. She watched Isaiah set the pages down. She watched his face when he said, "It's exactly right." She saw what Caleb didn't see, which was the thing that happened in her husband's eyes in the 2 seconds between finishing the essay and speaking, a brief and private reckoning that closed itself off before anyone could ask about it. She went to the bedroom and let them have the kitchen. Later, after Caleb had gone to his room and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Isaiah took his coffee out to the back porch. He sat in the chair closest to the railing and looked at the yard, at the dark shape of the oak tree they had planted the year they moved in, at the fence that needed repainting on the far side and that he kept meaning to get to. He did not look at his phone. He did not turn on the porch light. He just sat there with the cup in both hands and let the quiet be what it was. This was the only moment of the day when he allowed himself to feel the full weight of it, not process it, not plan around it, just feel it. The way Victor's voice sounded in that room at the Buckhead Athletic Club, the laughter from those 2 men, the phone camera turning toward him like a slow pivot of judgment. 14,000 people watching a version of something that happened to him regularly in smaller doses in quieter rooms, without cameras, without captions, without anyone finding it notable enough to document. He had been carrying this for a long time, not just 3 weeks, much longer than 3 weeks. Denise came out and sat beside him without turning on the porch light either. She pulled her cardigan tighter and looked at the same yard. They stayed like that for a while. Then she said, "You know what I've learned in the ER? The ones who stay quiet are usually the ones holding everyone else together." Isaiah turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. He said, "Sometimes I wonder if staying quiet just teaches people it's okay to keep going." Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Or it teaches your son what real strength looks like." Isaiah didn't answer, but something in his posture changed, barely perceptible, the way a held breath releases without sound. He looked at the oak tree for a long time after that. He had learned to carry weight early. 2 tours with the Army Military Police, the second one into territory that required him to make decisions under conditions where the wrong answer had permanent consequences. He had been decorated twice, citations that used words like valor and composure under fire, words that he had never once repeated to anyone outside the paperwork. He came home from the Army with a clear-headed understanding of what he was capable of under pressure and a complete absence of need to prove it to anyone. His first year on the Atlanta Police Department had tested that understanding in ways the Army hadn't. 3 separate use-of-force complaints filed against him in 12 months, each one from a stop, where his conduct had been by the book, documented, reviewed, and cleared. All 3 dismissed. All 3 retaliatory in origin, filed by people who had expected a different response from him and were unsettled when they didn't get it. He had learned then what the system responded to and what it didn't, what patience built over time and what anger cost immediately. The scar near his left eyebrow was not from any of that. It was from a traffic stop in 2019, a man who panicked and swung a door open hard and fast as Isaiah leaned in to speak to him. 3 stitches. Isaiah had driven himself to urgent care after his shift declined to file a supplemental complaint and returned to full duty the following morning. His sergeant at the time had asked why he hadn't escalated it. Isaiah had said, because it was an accident and the man was frightened and escalating, it wouldn't have made either of them safer. Victor Langford was not the first person to underestimate him. He would not be the last. The next afternoon, Miguel pulled their cruiser into the lot behind a Publix on Roswell Road and turned off the engine and sat there. Isaiah waited. Miguel said, "You're letting him do this every day, and people are watching Isaiah. What does that teach them?" Isaiah looked out the windshield at the back wall of the grocery store, at the loading dock, at a cart someone had left at an angle in the painted fire lane. He said, "It teaches them that I'm still here, every single morning." Miguel said, "That's not enough." Isaiah said, "It's enough for today." The silence between them was not empty. It had texture to it, the kind that comes from 2 people who respect each other, enough not to fill a hard moment with easy words. Miguel stared at the steering wheel. Isaiah waited. Then Miguel said, "Just so you know, I've been keeping my own log." Isaiah turned and looked at him. Miguel kept his eyes on the steering wheel. He said dates, times, locations, exact words where I could get them. 3 weeks of it. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. He said, "I know you have." Miguel finally looked over at him. He said, "You knew." Isaiah said, "Miguel, you've been writing in that notebook every time you think I'm not watching. I've been watching for 20 years. Miguel looked at the notebook on the center console like he was seeing it for the first time. He said, "How is it possible that you're the calm one in this situation?" Isaiah said, "I'm not calm, I'm just practiced." He reached over and picked up the radio and called in their position and told dispatch they were back on. The following morning, outside a coffee shop on East Andrews Drive called Narrow Road, Isaiah was on foot when he heard someone say his name, not Officer Brooks. His name, Isaiah. He turned. Emma Langford was standing a few feet away on the sidewalk, a leather tote over one shoulder, a coffee cup in her other hand, dressed like someone who had come from or was heading to somewhere professional. She looked like she had been deciding whether to speak to him for about 30 seconds before she actually did it. She said, "I was there, at the club. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. What my father said was wrong, and I was embarrassed, and I should have said something in the moment, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that too." Isaiah looked at her steadily. He said, "You don't have to apologize for another adult's choices." Emma said, "He's my father. It feels like I do." Isaiah said, "Then show him what you know is right. That's all any of us can do." Emma held his gaze for a moment. She looked like someone turning a sentence over in their mind to see if it would hold the weight she needed it to hold. Then she nodded, once said thank you, and started walking. Isaiah watched her go, then turned back toward the block. He had taken maybe 20 steps when he heard her stop behind him. Not a sound she made, just an absence of footsteps. He didn't turn around. A few seconds later, the footsteps started again, moving in the other direction, faster now. He didn't know what had made her stop. He wouldn't find out until later that her phone had buzzed in her jacket pocket with a text from her father. It said, "Heard you were talking to that officer. Don't." 3 days after Morgan set those incident reports down on her desk, a woman named Dana Reeves parked her car on Peachtree Road and sat in it for 10 minutes before going inside the coffee shop where she had arranged to meet her source. Dana was 38, a staff writer at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 11 years, and she had a particular instinct for stories that looked like one thing on the surface and were something else entirely underneath. The video of the Buckhead Athletic Club incident had come to her through an editor who had flagged it as local color, a wealthy man being condescending to a patrol officer, the kind of thing that generated engagement for a day and then disappeared. Dana had watched it twice and felt something she had learned over the years, to pay attention to a quiet certainty that the frame was wrong, that whatever this story was, it was not the story anyone was currently telling. She spent 2 days pulling public records before she called anyone. What she found in those records stopped her in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and made her sit back in her chair and look at the ceiling for a moment. Isaiah Marcus Brooks, age 43, 14 years, with the Atlanta Police Department, Buckhead Patrol Division. Prior service, United States Army, Military Police Corps. 8 years, 2 tours overseas. Separated at the rank of Staff Sergeant, with 2 commendations for valor, additional certification in hostage negotiation, and tactical rescue operations, completed at Fort Leonard Wood. APD service record. 0 sustained complaints across 14 years, and more than 4,000 documented incident responses. 3 life-saving commendations from the department, the most recent awarded in 2021 for the extraction of a family of 4 from a vehicle submerged in a retention pond. Off a 285, an operation he completed alone before the fire department arrived in water at night with a broken door mechanism he had to force manually. He had been offered a lieutenant's position twice. He had declined both times. When asked why, according to a brief departmental note, he had said he preferred street patrol because that was where the work happened. He served without compensation on the board of a South Atlanta nonprofit called the Forward Path Youth Initiative, which he had helped found 11 years earlier, and which had placed over 300 young men in college preparatory programs since its founding. Dana looked at all of this for a long time. Then she looked up the net worth of Victor Langford, founder of Langford Urban Development, and thought about what it meant that this particular man had spent 3 weeks publicly questioning whether Isaiah Brooks was competent enough to write a parking citation. She requested an appointment with Captain Rebecca Morgan. Morgan received her in the precinct conference room 2 days later, and the meeting lasted 40 minutes. Morgan did not confirm or deny ongoing departmental actions, which was exactly what Dana expected. What she did not expect was that when she laid out Isaiah's service record from public sources, Morgan's expression did not change at all, which told her that Morgan already knew every word of it, had always known it, and had been sitting with the particular frustration of a commanding officer who watches an exceptional person absorb disrespect, and is limited in what she can do about it until the person being disrespected decides to let the documentation speak. The day after Dana's meeting with Morgan, Isaiah came in before his shift to find the union rep, a compact man named Gerald Osei, already seated in Morgan's office. Morgan closed the door. She laid it out in order. The video, 14,000 views, and climbing regional activist networks beginning to share it with wider commentary. Isaiah's 3 incident reports dated and time-stamped. A formal inquiry now open with APD's Office of Professional Standards not against Isaiah, but citing Victor Langford's conduct as a repeated pattern of interference with and denigration of an officer in the performance of duty, and 3 separate written complaints filed in the past week by Buckhead business owners who had witnessed at least one of the incidents and had decided they had seen enough. Morgan slid the complaints across the table. Isaiah picked them up and read them. The first 2 were from men he recognized, a dry cleaner owner on East Paces Ferry and a restaurant manager on Piedmont who had watched the hall monitor comment from across the street. The third was from a woman named Claudette Warren, who owned a framing shop 2 doors down from Café Monet, and who had apparently been watching the pattern for all 3 weeks with the focused attention of someone who had seen this kind of thing before and was tired of pretending she hadn't. Her complaint was 4 paragraphs, and the last sentence read, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 19 years, and I have watched good officers treated like props, and I am writing this down because someone should." Isaiah set the papers down. Morgan said, "You documented everything. That's why we can move on this." Isaiah said, "I wasn't documenting to build a case. I was doing my job." Morgan looked at him for a moment. She said, "Sometimes those are the same thing." Gerald Osei said nothing during any of this, which was the mark of a union rep who understood when his presence was the point rather than his words. Across the city, in an office on the 34th floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue, Victor Langford's assistant knocked twice on his open door and came in holding a printed sheet. She said the video has been picked up by Buckhead Insider and ATL Current. Both ran items this morning. Victor was reviewing a set of architectural renderings spread across his desk. He did not look up. He said, "What kind of items?" She said, "One of them identified you by name." He looked up then briefly, then back at the renderings. He said, "It's a parking lot disagreement with a patrol officer. Nobody cares about that." His assistant said, "There's also an inquiry open with the city." Victor set down his pen. He said, "What kind of inquiry?" She told him. "Not a complaint against the officer, a formal record of his own conduct." He listened to this with the expression of a man who has just noticed a small crack in a wall he was certain was load-bearing and is deciding how concerned to be. What his assistant did not yet know, because the call had come in 20 minutes earlier and had been routed to his PR firm before reaching his office, was that Langford Urban Development was currently in the final approval stage of a $340 million mixed-use development contract with the city of Atlanta. The project required a city council vote scheduled for 6 weeks out. One of the 9 council members, Councilwoman Patricia Adesanya, had seen the video 4 days ago. She had not called Victor's office. She had not posted anything publicly. She had simply watched it twice and forwarded it to 2 colleagues without comment. In real estate, silence from a council member at the wrong moment was its own kind of answer. Emma Langford had found out about the council vote through a colleague at her firm who worked municipal contracts. She called her father's cell phone that afternoon. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She called his office line. His assistant said he was in a meeting. Emma said, "Tell him it's about the Adesanya vote." She waited on hold for 3 minutes. His assistant came back and said he would call her this evening. He did not call her that evening. What neither Emma nor Victor knew yet was that the owner of a private security firm that operated a CCTV network covering the exterior of the Buckhead Athletic Club and the surrounding block had received a call that afternoon from Dana Reeves. He had pulled the footage at her request, 3 weeks of it. Every entrance, every parking lane, every sidewalk interaction captured in high resolution from 2 angles. He called her back an hour later and told her the footage was exactly what she was looking for. Dana called Isaiah that same evening. He was in the cruiser finishing his shift when his personal cell rang with a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was professional and direct identified herself, named the paper, and said she was working on a story about policing and wealth disparity in Buckhead, and that she had come across his service record and would appreciate 10 minutes of his time. He listened to it once parked outside his house for a moment, then called her back. She answered on the first ring. She thanked him and started to explain the scope of the piece. He let her finish. Then he said, "I appreciate you reaching out. I won't be doing an interview." Dana said, "Don't you want people to know who you really are?" Isaiah said, "People who matter already know." She paused. Then she said, "What about the ones who don't?" Isaiah looked through the windshield at the front of his house at the light on in Caleb's window on the 2nd floor. He said, "Write the truth. All of it. That's enough." He ended the call and sat there for a moment. Then he got out of the car. Miguel was parked behind him, having followed him back to the neighborhood out of habit, and he climbed out of his own vehicle and leaned against the door. He said, "What did you say?" Isaiah locked his car and walked toward the house. He said enough. Dana Reeves filed her story on a Monday night, and it went live on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution website at 6:47 the following Tuesday morning. The headline was simple: "Who Protects Buckhead? A Profile in Quiet Service." The piece ran 2,200 words. It was factual, restrained, and devastating in the way that only accurate writing can be the kind of story that doesn't need to editorialize because the documented record does that work on its own. Dana laid out Isaiah's full service history without embellishment. 2 tours of military service, 14 years of patrol, 3 life-saving commendations, the submerged vehicle rescue described in one precise paragraph that included the water temperature, the visibility conditions, and the time elapsed between Isaiah's arrival and the family being pulled clear. She included the Forward Path Youth Initiative, its founding date, its placement numbers. The fact that Isaiah had never once mentioned it in any public capacity. She named Victor Langford. She named the formal conduct complaints. She quoted Claudette Warren's 4-paragraph submission, in part using a single sentence from the final paragraph that read, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 19 years, and I have watched good officers treated like props," and noted that 2 additional business owners had filed similar records with APD. She included a statement from APD confirming an inquiry was open. She included the CCTV footage description. She did not use the word racist anywhere in the piece. She did not need to. By noon, the story had 180,000 reads. By 2 in the afternoon, it had been picked up by the Atlanta Business Chronicle, the Georgia Public Broadcasting News Desk, and 3 regional outlets in the Southeast. By 4, it had reached national aggregators. Social media moved the way it does when a story is written so cleanly that even people who want to argue with it can't find the edge to grab. Victor's PR firm issued a statement at 11 that morning. It read, "Mr. Langford holds deep respect for the men and women of law enforcement and is committed to the communities in which Langford Urban Development operates." The firm declined further comment. Nobody believed it. Not because the words were implausible, but because the documented record existed alongside them. And the documented record was 14 years long and had been assembled by a man who had never once raised his voice. Councilwoman Patricia Adesanya issued no public statement. Instead, at 9 that morning, she submitted a formal request to the city's Office of Contract Compliance for a 30-day review of Langford Urban Development's pending mixed-use development agreement, a $340 million project covering 6 acres of mixed commercial and residential construction in the Midtown corridor. The request cited the reputational and conduct concerns raised by the ongoing APD inquiry. It was procedurally clean and legally unassailable, and it hit Victor Langford's development timeline like a wall. A 30-day review meant a 30-day delay in the council vote. A 30-day delay meant his construction financing sat in a holding pattern with carrying costs accruing against committed capital at approximately $70,000 per day. Over 30 days, that was $2.1 million in costs attached to money that was not yet working. His lead investor, a private equity partner named Harrison Webb, who had committed $85 million to the project, called Victor at 10:15 that morning. Webb did not raise his voice. Men who managed $85 million commitments rarely raise their voices. He simply said, "Victor, what did you do?" Victor said, "I made a joke to a patrol officer. That's all this is." Webb said it's on the front page of the AJC. That's not a joke anymore. That's a liability disclosure question for our LPs. You understand what I'm telling you? Victor said he understood. He said he would handle it. He said the review was procedural and would resolve within the window. Webb said, "I need you to stop being visible on this. Whatever you're thinking about doing next, don't." Victor said he understood that too. He thanked Webb and ended the call and sat at his desk for a moment with his hands flat on the surface. His PR firm called him again at 1 in the afternoon and told him the same thing Webb had told him. Stay quiet. Do not engage. The story was written straight and could not be effectively contested. The only move was stillness. Victor was not built for stillness. At 3:45 that afternoon, he called into the afternoon drive segment of a local radio program called The Buckhead Hour, a show he had appeared on twice before to discuss urban development and city planning, a comfortable forum where he had always been received warmly. He was calm, he was polished, he was completely and precisely wrong about every decision he made in the next 7 minutes. He said the situation had been blown out of proportion by a media environment that rewarded outrage over context. He said he had nothing but admiration for law enforcement, and that the officer in question, and he paused here, in a way that made the next word land like a door closing, seemed like a fine officer. He said what had occurred was friendly banter that he regretted had been mischaracterized, and that he looked forward to the review process running its course. The host did not push back. He didn't need to. The clip was already being cut before the segment ended. By 6 that evening, the audio had been reshared 40,000 times. The phrase seemed like a fine officer was in 11,000 posts by 7. People who had not seen the original AJC story were now seeing the radio clip first, which was worse because the clip stripped away every qualification and left only the sound of a man who still did not understand what he had done. Emma heard it in her car on the way back from a client meeting in Midtown. She was on I-85 northbound when the segment played through her speakers via her phone. She listened to the whole thing without moving. Then she pulled onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and sat there with the engine running and the hazard lights on. She called her father. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised her. She said, "Dad, stop talking." He said, "Emma, I'm handling it." She said, "You went on the radio, after Harrison Webb told you not to, after your own PR firm told you not to, and you said he seems like a fine officer and you said it the way you say everything, like you're doing someone a favor by acknowledging them. Please stop talking." He said, "I'm not going to let a news cycle define who I am." She said, "It's not a news cycle. It's a record. There's a difference." He did not respond to that. She stayed on the shoulder for another minute after the call ended, watching the headlights move past her in the dark. Victor left the Buckhead Club at 2:31 the following Wednesday morning. He had attended a private dinner, 12 people a standing monthly gathering of developers and city planners that had existed for 9 years and that Victor had never missed. He had 2 glasses of wine over 4 hours. He was not impaired. He was tired, and he was carrying 3 days of accumulated pressure that had not broken in any direction. And he walked to the valet stand on the side street off Far Road and handed over his ticket and stood there in the night air and thought about nothing in particular. The Bentley arrived. He tipped the valet and got in and pulled out onto Far Road heading toward Peachtree. The wrong-way driver came through the intersection at Peachtree and Habersham at 55 miles per hour, running a light that had been red for 4 seconds. He was in a rented Chevy Tahoe, and he was driving the wrong direction on Peachtree, which, on a Wednesday night at 2:47 in the morning, meant there had been almost no traffic to warn him or stop him. The impact took the Bentley on the driver's side rear quarter panel and spun it counterclockwise across the intersection and into a utility pole on the northeast corner. The force of the spin was enough to jam the driver's door into the frame. The seatbelt locked at impact and held, which likely saved Victor's life in that first second, and became a trap in every second after. The fuel line ruptured somewhere beneath the rear of the car. The fire did not announce itself. It came the way dangerous things sometimes do. Quietly at first, a smell before a visible flame, a warmth before a visible light. Victor tried the door. It did not move. He tried to reach the seatbelt release and found his left leg pinned at an angle that sent a specific and clarifying pain up through his hip when he shifted his weight. He could see the smoke beginning to gather at the bottom edge of his vision, low and dark and patient. He could not move. 4 blocks north, Isaiah was parked on the shoulder of Peachtree, finishing an incident report on a laptop mounted to the dash. The call came through dispatch at 2:47, and the address was still being read when he had the cruiser in drive. He came around the curve and saw the utility pole and the Bentley and the fire in the same moment, a single image that his training parsed in approximately 3 seconds, fire at the rear, and spreading forward driver's door, compromise possible entrapment fire department at minimum 4 minutes out. He pulled the cruiser across the intersection to block traffic and was out the door before it fully stopped. He came around the passenger side of the Bentley and looked through the shattered window. Victor Langford looked back at him from the driver's seat, face cut from the glass left leg at the wrong angle, smoke beginning to fill the lower half of the cabin. His eyes moved from the fire to Isaiah and then back to Isaiah and stayed there. His mouth formed one word: "You." Isaiah had already reached for his rescue tool. The passenger window came apart in one clean strike, and Isaiah cleared the remaining glass with his forearm without pausing. The smoke inside the cabin was still low, hugging the floor, but it was moving upward with the slow and certain patience of something that had already decided how this would end if left alone. Isaiah had seen fire behave this way before, and he knew the number that mattered was not how large the flames were, but how fast they were moving, and these were moving. He assessed in the time it took to lean through the window. Fire at the rear quarter traveling forward along the undercarriage. Seatbelt locked at the buckle. Left leg pinned between the door panel and the center console from the rotational force of the impact. The door on the driver's side was gone as an option. He had one angle and approximately 90 seconds before the heat made it unusable. He said, "Sir, I need you to stay still. I've got you. Keep your eyes on me." Victor's eyes found his and held. There was something moving across his face that was not any single expression, but several arriving in quick succession, the disbelief of a man seeing something he cannot immediately categorize, and then something that looked like shame, brief and unguarded, the kind that appears when a person suddenly understands the full distance between what they assumed and what is true, and then finally underneath all of it, relief so complete it looked almost like collapse. He stayed still. He kept his eyes on Isaiah. Isaiah reached across the center console with the blade and cut the seatbelt in 2 passes. He got his left arm under Victor's right arm across the chest and said, "I'm going to pull you toward me. Don't push with the left leg. Let me do the work." Victor nodded. Isaiah pulled. The leg came free with a sound that made Victor inhale sharply through his teeth, but he did not cry out and he did not fight the movement. Isaiah pulled him across the center console and through the passenger window in a motion that was not graceful, but was controlled, managing the angle to keep Victor's head clear of the window frame, his own back taking the edge of the door as a trade-off he made without thinking about it. He got Victor onto the pavement and moved him 10 feet from the vehicle, then 15, then set him down on the curb on the far side of the sidewalk and crouched in front of him and looked at his eyes. He said, "Stay here, don't try to stand." Then he stood up and called it in-vehicle fire. One occupant extracted requesting medical and fire intersection of Peachtree and Habersham, and he gave his badge number and his unit, and he did it in the flat, even voice of someone for whom this was a procedure being executed, not a moment being experienced. 22 seconds later, the rear cabin of the Bentley filled with flame. Miguel's cruiser came around the corner from the south and stopped behind Isaiah's blocked position. Miguel got out and took in the burning car, and Victor Langford sitting on the curb with blood on his face, and Isaiah standing between them, still on the radio uniform torn at the left sleeve, where the window frame had caught it. Miguel looked at all of it. He did not say anything. He walked to the curb and crouched next to Victor and asked him where he was hurt, and he stayed there until the ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Isaiah never looked back at the car. Across the intersection, a man named Terrence Cole was sitting in a Kia Stinger that he had pulled to the curb when he saw the crash happen from half a block away. Terrence drove for a rideshare platform 3 nights a week, and his dash cam had been running, as it always was, and had captured the impact, the spin, the pole, and everything that followed. When he saw the police cruiser arrive and a single officer get out and go directly to the burning car without waiting, he picked up his phone and started recording. He recorded Isaiah arriving at the passenger window. He recorded the rescue. He recorded Victor being brought through the window and moved to the curb. He recorded Isaiah on the radio and Miguel crouching on the sidewalk, and the moment the cabin went fully alight behind all of them. He stayed in his car until the ambulance came. Then he sat in the silence of his vehicle for a while and looked at what he had on his phone. He uploaded it at 3:58 in the morning. He wrote 5 words as the caption: "Buckhead cop saves man who mocked him. Real." By 6 a.m., it had 600,000 views. The algorithm recognized what human attention had already decided, that this was not a story people were going to scroll past. By noon, it had 2.4 million. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution embedded it in a breaking news update beneath Dana Reeves's original piece, and the two sat together on the same page, the documented record of what had happened over 3 weeks, and then the 68 seconds of footage that showed how it ended. The juxtaposition required no caption. Every outlet that ran the video understood this, and most of them let it stand without one. Victor Langford arrived at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital at 3:22 in the morning with a fractured tibia, significant smoke inhalation, and lacerations across his right forearm and cheek from the window glass. The emergency physician on duty noted that the fracture was clean and the inhalation, while serious, had been limited by the speed of the extraction. She said directly to the attending nurse that whoever had gotten him out had done it at exactly the right moment. Emma arrived at 4:10. She had gotten the call from a number she didn't recognize, a hospital intake coordinator, reading from his emergency contact form. She drove from her Midtown apartment in 17 minutes. She sat in the chair beside his bed and did not speak for a while. Victor was awake, oxygen line in place. leg elevated, looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who is not yet sure what he is allowed to feel. He said he didn't have to come in after me. Emma looked at her father for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, he did. That's who he is. It was never about you." Victor did not answer. He kept looking at the ceiling, but something in his face changed, a settling the way a thing looks when it finally stops resisting the weight it has been carrying. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want you to make a call for me." Emma watched him. He said to his captain, "I want to say something." Officially, Emma held his gaze. She looked for the angle in it, the PR instinct, the image calculation, the move beneath the move. She did not find one. What she found instead was a man in a hospital bed at 4 a.m. who looked for the first time in as long as she could remember, like he was not managing how he appeared. She picked up her phone. By Thursday afternoon, the story had moved to national broadcast. NBC ran a 3-minute segment during the evening news. CNN covered it twice, once as a breaking development and once as a longer feature on the documented pattern preceding the rescue. Local Atlanta affiliates ran it as their lead story for 2 consecutive evenings. The framing was consistent across every outlet: not hero cop, not dramatic rescue, but something quieter and more specific. What integrity looks like under pressure. That was the phrase that kept appearing in headlines, in social posts, in the comment sections of people who had watched the dash cam footage and then gone back and read Dana Reeves's original piece, and then sat with both of them for a while. APD's Public Affairs Office issued a statement on Isaiah's behalf at his request. It read, "I responded to a call. I did my job. Officer Ramirez and our dispatch team were outstanding. That's the whole story." The internet received this statement and immediately collectively decided it was not the whole story and made it their business to tell the rest of it. Isaiah's military records circulated again. The forward path. Youth Initiative received 1,400 new donor inquiries in 48 hours. Claudette Warren's framing shop on Peachtree was mentioned in 6 separate articles, and her written complaint was quoted in full in 2 of them. Councilwoman Patricia Adesanya issued a formal statement on Thursday evening. She named Isaiah Brooks directly. She described his service as an example of what this city is built on, and noted that the Office of Contract Compliance Review of Langford Urban Development would continue through its standard process. The PR firm representing Langford Urban Development did not issue any statement in response. Their phones, according to 2 journalists who tried to reach them, went to voicemail and stayed there. 3 days after the rescue, Victor Langford released a statement from his personal email address. Not through his PR firm. Not through Langford Urban Development's communications office. From his own account, sent directly to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and 3 local news outlets at 9 a.m, with his name at the bottom and no letterhead above it. Emma had sat with him the night before while he wrote it. She had not written it for him. She had read each draft and told him when a sentence sounded like a press release and when it sounded like a person, and he had kept rewriting until she stopped pointing things out. It took 4 drafts and most of the evening. The statement named Isaiah Brooks directly. It described the pattern of conduct over 3 weeks in plain language, not allegations, not characterizations, but a recounting in Victor's own words of what he had said, and where, and in front of whom. It used the word wrong 3 times. Not if anyone was offended, not to the extent my words were hurtful. Wrong. What I did was wrong. The way I spoke to Officer Brooks was wrong. I knew what I was doing, and I chose to keep doing it, and that was wrong. He announced a $500,000 endowment to the Forward Path Youth Initiative, structured as a 5-year commitment, paid in annual installments designated for college preparatory programming in South Atlanta. He did not ask for Isaiah's forgiveness. He did not suggest that the endowment was restitution or that it closed anything. He wrote, "This is a beginning and not an ending, and I understand that the difference between those 2 things will be determined by what I do next, not by what I say now." The internet received it the way the internet receives most things that resist easy categorization, with division. Some people read it and found it genuine and said so. Some people read it and found it calculated and said so. Some people read it and said the money was the only part that mattered and the words were just packaging. Some people said the words were the only part that mattered because money was easy and accountability was hard. All of these reactions existed simultaneously, and none of them were entirely wrong, and Victor Langford, lying in a rented hospital bed with his leg elevated, read all of them on his phone and did not issue any response to any of them, which was for him a new kind of discipline. The City of Atlanta's Office of Contract Compliance completed its review of the Langford Urban Development Agreement 12 days later, 3 days ahead of the 30-day window. The council vote proceeded. The project was approved, but not as originally structured. Councilwoman Patricia Adesanya had worked with 2 colleagues during the review period to attach a community benefit agreement to the contract, requiring Langford Urban Development to allocate 15% of the project's ground floor commercial space to minority-owned small businesses at below-market lease rates for the first 7 years, and to fund a $1.2 million workforce development program tied to the construction phase. Victor's attorneys reviewed the additions. Victor signed without negotiating them down. Harrison Webb called him after the vote. The call was brief. Webb said it passed. Victor said, "I know." Webb said the benefit agreement is going to cost you about $4 million over 7 years. Victor said, "I know that too." There was a pause. Then Webb said, "All right," and ended the call. APD held a formal commendation ceremony the following Friday. Isaiah's 4th life-saving commendation was presented by Captain Morgan in a room that held 40 people, most of them colleagues, a few of them journalists who had been told by APD's Public Affairs Office that photographs were permitted, but that the officer had declined any interviews before or after. Morgan gave a brief address. She did not describe Isaiah as a hero, which was the word everyone else had been using, because she had known him for 6 years and understood that the word would embarrass him, and that embarrassing him in front of his colleagues was not the kind of commendation he would want. She said instead that his conduct over the preceding weeks represented the standard the department aspired to, and that, beginning the following month, APD would implement a formal protocol for documenting civilian conduct incidents during patrol, a structured reporting process that would give officers a clear procedural path when facing patterns of interference or denigration in the field. She said this protocol exists because one officer had the discipline to document everything and the patience to let the record speak. Then she handed Isaiah the commendation and shook his hand, and that was that. Isaiah folded the commendation once and put it in his jacket pocket. Miguel, standing 2 rows back, looked at the ceiling briefly and then looked at the floor and did not say anything for a long time, which for Miguel was its own kind of tribute. The following Monday morning, Isaiah was on the foot patrol on Peachtree Road at 8 in the morning when he heard the uneven rhythm of crutches on the sidewalk behind him. He turned. Victor Langford was moving toward him in a gray jacket and dark pants, the crutches managing the weight of a leg that was healing but had not healed. He looked smaller than he had before. Not physically, something else. The particular compression that happens to a person when the image they have maintained for a long time no longer fits the facts. There were no cameras, no crowd. A few people passed on either side of them, without interest, the ordinary foot traffic of a Buckhead morning. Victor stopped in front of him. He said, "I owe you an apology, not the statement, a real one." Isaiah waited. Victor said, "I judged you wrong, completely wrong. Every day for 3 weeks I looked at you and decided I already knew what you were, and I was wrong about all of it, and I am going to have to live with that." He said it without looking away. His voice was even, and it did not sound rehearsed, and it did not sound like a man performing accountability for an audience because there was no audience. There was just a sidewalk and 2 men and the morning traffic moving past them on Peachtree Road. Isaiah looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Then live with it the right way." Victor nodded once. Isaiah nodded back. Victor adjusted his grip on the crutches and turned and made his way back down the sidewalk the way he had come. Isaiah watched him until he reached the corner. Then he turned back toward the block and kept walking. That evening, Isaiah came home to find the kitchen counter lit up with the glow of a laptop screen. Denise was in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, arms crossed, a smile on her face that she was doing almost nothing to contain. The laptop was open to an email, and Isaiah could read the subject line from 6 feet away. "Congratulations from Georgia Institute of Technology." He had 1 second to take it in before Caleb came around the corner from the hallway and hit him at full speed, both arms around his father's chest. The kind of hug a 16-year-old boy who has been told he is too old for hugging gives when the moment is too large for the rules he has set for himself. Isaiah caught him and held on. He was still in his uniform. He hadn't even put down his keys. He stood in his kitchen with his son's arms around him and one hand on the back of Caleb's head, and he did not say anything for a long time. He had never wanted a monument. He had never wanted a parade or a news segment or a commendation ceremony or 2.5 million people watching a dash cam video of the worst 4 minutes of someone else's night. He had wanted his son to see something true, to grow up inside the daily evidence that a man could be treated as less than he was and choose every morning to show up and do the work anyway. Not because it was easy, and not because the world had earned that generosity, but because the alternative was becoming someone his son would have to explain away. Caleb had seen it, all 3 weeks of it, and he had sat at that kitchen table and written an essay about integrity under pressure and gotten into Georgia Tech on the strength of it. That was the whole story. Everything else was documentation. These are the black stories that don't become blockbusters or television series, the life stories that don't arrive with dramatic music, or a moment where the quiet man finally raises his voice and says his piece. These are the touching stories that live in kitchens and patrol cars and back porches at midnight. The real-life stories of men and women who absorb what the world throws and still iron their uniform in the morning and still say good morning to the woman with the dog and still reach through the fire for the man who called them parking lot security. Not because the world has earned it, because their children are watching. The next morning, Isaiah's cruiser pulled onto Peachtree Road at 7:15, as it always did. The storefronts were opening. The coffee shops were filling. A black Porsche whispered past in the left lane. The city was becoming itself again, the way it did every day, indifferent and loud and full of people moving through it at the speed of their own ambitions. Isaiah drove the block he had driven for 4 years. Same street, same uniform, same quiet attention to everything the world was showing him. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you needed to feel, today share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are more stories like this one, waiting to be told, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the spaces where nobody is watching. Subscribe and stay close. The next one is already coming.